Okay, so we're going to look at network security, which is a very common set of questions on the exam. And the three main areas that you need to be aware of is networking threats. What are the threats to a network? How we identify those threats, which is less important for the exam. But what is very important is obviously how we prevent them. The key thing to bear in mind is that not every threat will be experienced by each person. So an individual will have a different set of threats to, say, a company would. Okay, so we will explore that when we go through it. Also, when preventing vulnerabilities, there are some which are more effective than others for certain threats. Okay, and we'll kind of point that out as we go along as well. So let's get into it. So these are the key threats you need to be aware of, just as a little overview. So there's quite a few of them, and there are some which are a bit more technical, so we'll spend a bit more time going over those ones. Those are data interception, denial of service, SQL injection, and networking policy. The rest of them are fairly straightforward. So malware, you'll be very familiar with malware. These are viruses, ransomware, trojans, worms, basically any malicious software, malware, that can be put onto your computer. Malware tends to come from social engineering. So this is where people try and trick you into downloading something. That might be through coercion. It might be through trying to use fear to get you to download something. For example, it might pop up with a pop-up saying, you have a virus. It's all this antivirus software now, which actually is the virus. Okay, so they might use those kind of techniques to try and get you to do something. So social engineering is essentially the art of tricking someone or persuading them or coercing them, forcing them to do something to give you access to files that you shouldn't have access to. Brute force is slightly more technical. This is where we will just try lots of different passwords before we get lucky, maybe. Most people don't use good passwords, so therefore, if you use a list of commonly chosen passwords, you will most likely get lucky with quite a few accounts. And this is why we always use capital letters and things like that. Right, so phishing, this is, we've already kind of mentioned it, is where an email or text message or a WhatsApp message or something like that is going to be sent to the person to try and trick them into downloading something or into going to a website which is infected with a virus or something along those lines. The next one, denial of service, is only aimed at companies, okay? So this has got nothing to do with an individual. No one's going to DDoS me, okay? Because what's the point, you know, make my laptop not work for a few hours? Oh, well, never mind, I'll go get myself a cup of tea instead, okay? However, for a company, if their website goes offline for a few hours, well, that might be millions of pounds worth of lost revenue, okay? So denial of service is where a website or a server or something like that is going to be bombarded with tons and tons of messages all at the same time with the idea of overwhelming it and forcing it to crash. Okay, what's much more common is a DDoS or a distributed denial of service, and this is where lots of computers do exactly the same thing. So rather than just having one PC sending thousands of messages to the server, we'll have loads and loads and loads of maybe 100 odd computers all sending messages at the same time to try and overwhelm and flood it with information. Data interception, this happens in corporate networks and networks more than it does anywhere else. And this is where someone will gain access to a local area network, so internally, and then will start to listen to the packets that are going across the network, with the idea of obviously going into those packets and pulling out useful information out there, such as emails and things like that. Okay, if you use a Wi-Fi which is not encrypted, so public Wi-Fi, for example, then that is also at risk of those packets being intercepted, which is why you should never use public Wi-Fi to do anything important other than maybe checking the weather, maybe. SQL injection is only aimed at companies. Okay, and this is where you will have a website which will have maybe a logon system. Okay, you type in username and password and you log on. However, for SQL injection, instead of typing in my username, I might type in a malformed SQL command, or basically a command designed to do some damage. Okay, Once I've sent that SQL command, if the website's not protecting against it, then what will happen is that SQL will run on the server and maybe will delete records in the database, or will give me access to the website without actually knowing the username and password and things like that. So SQL injection is where we will put inside the username and password boxes on a form an SQL command to try and bypass security or to delete records. Poor networking policy is really a way of trying to enforce that people are careful with their username passwords. So a poor networking policy means that this is not happening. So for example, let's say your networking policy doesn't say you should have a password with letters and numbers in it, for example. That means that your password is probably going to be easy to guess, and because of that, people can do an easy brute force on it, and therefore your network is at risk. So a poor networking policy means that the people in that network who are using it on a day-to-day basis, who have permission to use it, are not protecting themselves adequately against all the other threats, and therefore are a risk to the system. Okay, but that's only for companies or organizations like a school. Right, well, how do we stop these attacks then? Okay, so each of these will have different effectiveness, so I will talk about what that means as we go through it. Okay, so networking policy, this is effective against brute force, okay, and also social engineering and phishing, because what it's doing is it's guiding staff on how to protect themselves against phishing attacks. Prevents them from going onto websites where they might download malware, so it also protects against viruses. It also will protect against brute force because the passwords are going to be more complex. So the policy will say you must have, I know, letters, numbers, a capital letter and a symbol. Okay, because of that, it's going to be really hard to guess it. Anti-malware, this will protect against viruses, obviously. It also helps protect against some kind of phishing, because obviously if your phishing attack has a virus attached to it and tricks you to download a virus, if you have antivirus software installed, well, that virus will be prevented. It's not guaranteed, obviously, but it will help you protect you. So antivirus software is there to protect individuals. Okay, it's used for individuals. Companies do use it, but you're much more likely to be talking about antivirus when you're talking about a person and not an organization. Okay. Firewalls. Tend to be used and talked about through companies more than individuals, although individuals will have firewalls. A firewall is a piece of software or hardware which will prevent certain things coming into the network and prevent certain things leaving it. For example, it might say you're not allowed to go on certain websites. Okay, so it might filter websites, or it might say you can't use these apps to prevent certain apps from being used. So firewalls will prevent unauthorized access in and out. It does help kind of monitor common attacks. So common attacks that are aware of will be prevented by a firewall as well. Okay, so but we tend to be talking about companies rather than individuals with this one. So user access levels tends to be used in organizations like a school or a company, and this is where different groups of users can only access certain things, and because of that, if they did become compromised for whatever reason, then they have a limited amount of things they can access. So for example, if a student account in school got compromised and was stolen by a hacker, then the worst they could do is send a few emails and maybe delete that student's files. Okay, not great for that student, but it's not going to impact the rest of the network very much at all. Passwords obviously is a given, isn't it? So that works for individuals massively. So individuals would make sure they have complex passwords. That is really there as part of a good networking policy as well. So that can be talked about in an organization. But if you are talking about organizations, you must mention networking policy. Okay. Encryption, this is there to prevent interception, data interception. So if data is intercepted but it's already been encrypted, then it doesn't matter. Okay, it's like let's say I had a message I want to send on paper. Instead of just passing the paper around where it might be intercepted, I'll lock it in a box first. Okay, so only the person with the key can unlock it to actually read the message. Okay, so that's kind of like encryption. It's where the message is turned secret, okay, and you need a special key to unlock it, which the other side of the message will have.